الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, I will recite Surah Al-Fatiha and then Al-Tariq. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسماء والطارق وما أدراك ما الطارق النجم الثاقب إن كل نفس لما عليها حافظ فلينظر الإنسان مما خلق من ماء دافق يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب إنه على رجعه لقادر يوم تبلى السرائر فما له من قوة ولا ناصر والسماء ذات الرجع والأرض ذات الصدع إنه لقول فصل وما هو بالهزل إنهم يكيدون كيدا وأكيد كيدا فمهل الكافرين أمهلهم رويدا. صدق الله العظيم.
Surah Fatiha, the opening. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Master of the Day of Judgment, Thee do we serve and Thee do we beseech for help. Keep us on the right path, the path of those upon whom Thou hast bestowed favors, not the path of those upon whom Thy wrath is brought down, nor of those who go astray. Surah Fatiha, the Nightcomer. By the sky and the nightcomer, and what can make you know what is the nightcomer? It is the piercing star. There is no soul but that it has over it a protector. So let man observe from what he was created. He was created from a fluid ejected, emerging from between the backbone and the ribs. Indeed, Allah, to return him, is able. The day when secrets will be put on trial, then man will have no power or any helper. By the sky which returns rain, and by the earth which cracks open. Indeed, the Quran is a decisive statement, and it is not amusement. Indeed, they are planning a plan, but I am planning a plan. So allow time for the disbelievers, leave them a while. Sadaqallah.
Thank you for Brother Nusram and Sister Sarah. Islam Awareness Week takes place across RPI during the spring semester and has been going on for the past few years. The aim is to simply provide a platform for Muslims and non-Muslims to help remove misconceptions about Islam, which is now the largest growing religion in the world. Islam Awareness Week provides an opportunity for people of all faiths to come together in a spirit of understanding and cooperation. Islam Awareness Week is also about helping to build links between people, a celebration of art and culture, and getting people to work together for a common good. At MSA of RPI, our Islam Awareness Week was filled with a series of events for the last 3 days. On the first day, we showed a documentary about Hajj pilgrimage, and the movie was called Inside Mecca. On the second day, we had a Quran cafe, where some of our Muslim brothers recited different verses of the Holy Quran. And at the end of the event, we had a discussion about it. And on the third day, we had a Scarves for Solidarity, where Muslims and non-Muslims were asked to wear a scarf in support of Muslim women who choose to wear hijab at their own will. And then we had a discussion after that, listening to the experience of each person throughout that day. On the fourth and the last day, is today, we are having a speech about science and Islam. The reason why we picked this topic is because, first of all, we are in an engineering school, so this topic will make sense. And second of all, there is a misconception that religion and science don't work together, while in fact, religion integrates science. Our speaker tonight will give us more information about this topic. He is one of the most well-respected and renowned Muslim scholars in North America. He holds a doctorate joined between the fields of physics and engineering. He is best known for his enlightening retreats, seminar empowering Muslims on their spiritual quest. Dr. Maghrawi is also an active participant of interfaith dialogue with the Jewish and Christian communities in the Capital District of New York State. Please welcome Dr. Mukhtar Maghrawi.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you and upon you. Shalom alaikum. Usually when the audience is very diverse, say if you don't understand any of the above languages, then hi. It gives me a great pleasure to be here tonight with all of you, students of RPI. I congratulate the Association of RPI for, alhamdulillah, what they have been providing. Of opening bridges of communications between Muslim students and others, exposing everybody to hopefully a proper understanding of what Islam is. I am indeed pleased to be part of that tonight, and I hope that what I will share with you tonight will be of some important intellectual and spiritual and practical benefit of it. Well, first of all, science and Islam, as our dear brother in the introduction mentioned, science and religion should be really integrated. And one of the most beautiful ways I think we have expressed it here tonight is you have started this session with the prayer of Salah. It just happened that 7:08 was the time of sunset, and Muslims do before prayer after sunset as well. That's the fourth prayer of the day. And thus, though we are going to talk about something scientific, we will pray. For me, as a Muslim, the universe, all of it, as God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, is in a state of prayerfulness, in a state of celebration of the divine. God teaches in the Quran, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ. Everything in the universe celebrates the glory of God. We believe as Muslims that everything in the universe has, again, the word is just a word in four-dimensional context of language. Everything in the universe has sort of a consciousness. Human consciousness is different than the consciousness of a table, of a particle, of a flower, of a molecule of water. We believe that everything has a sort of consciousness. And of course, we're not saying that that's like human consciousness, but it's a consciousness that is elucidated, for example, in what I just mentioned, and there are many other verses in the Quran that teach us that everything is in tasbih of God, is in dhikr of God, is in sense that it is as a spiritual awareness of God and is actually glorifying God. And God tells us in the Quran, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُمْ, but you do not perceive all, you do not conceive all, you do not comprehend the way they do that. And thus you find Muslim scholars of old, in the Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages. The Dark Ages is a relative term. It was Dark Ages in Europe and in the West, but it was not Dark Ages in the Muslim world at that time. It was the time of illumination, and it is that civilization illuminated up to the Middle Ages and up to the 15th century, basically, that gave the baton to the Western civilization to take over and to continue. Muslim scholars of the time, Muslim scientists of the time, as they treated the issues of nature, and as they discussed the laws of nature, whether in medicine, in chemistry, biology, in physics, in optics, in astronomy, even like Ibn Khaldun of the 13th and 14th century, who actually many of you probably do not know that. I don't know whether anyone knows that, but I'm going to say next. Khaldun in the 14th century has actually talked about evolution and wrote a famous book in natural history in which he mentioned, in the context of prophethood, he talked about a concept of evolution at least 4 centuries before it was ever discussed in the West. And when he and others did that, they did that in the continuum of matter and spirit together. He did not separate between the spiritual and the material. He did that in a way which continued from the material to the spiritual, in a way that was very natural to him. There was no disassociation, there was no break between the material and the spiritual world. It was a continuum. And therefore, the laws of nature as we study them are but a face of the same coin, namely, when both faces of the coin are taken together, that gives us a better reality of what existence is, of what the world is. Later on, the likes of Albert Einstein. Anybody doesn't know Albert Einstein? In his book, The Religious Spirit of Science, in 1934, he said, "You will hardly find one among the profounder sort of scientific minds without the religious feeling of his own. His religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals the intelligence of such superiority that, compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant action. This feeling is the guiding principle of his life and work, insofar as he succeeds in keeping himself from the shackles of selfish desire." End quote. Einstein, though a non-Muslim scientist, in the line of his predecessors, as he mentions, of greater and great profound thinkers before him, scientists before him, and whom I am sure he meant also many great Muslim scientists and scholars, had dealt with the issue with a profound sense of spiritual awareness, in which I put it in the form of treating the world as a continuum between the rational and the supra-rational, between the material and the spiritual. That there does not need to be a complete rupture between the two. They felt very comfortable. So what we were doing earlier, in my feeling as a Muslim, is simply also being in harmony with everything else in the universe. We were praying, we were celebrating, we were actually recalling our inner spiritual consciousness of the world, as the world itself does at every moment, at every instant. Everything in the world, in the universe, in space-time and beyond is in a state of, as I put it earlier, consciousness, awareness of the divine in ways we do not yet comprehend that, especially if we understand by scientific always something that has to be subjected to the laboratory experiments. You know, in Islam we talk about the unification principle. And in physics we talk about what? RPI students. And in physics we talk about what? What's the latest thing in cosmology? What's the latest thing in science that scientists are running behind? And if they find that, they say, well, physics stop, science stop. After that, like just commentaries. What is it? They can find theory. So in Islam we have Tawheed, right? Tawheed, we believe that God is one, His essence is one, His attributes are one, and therefore the creation must be one, and the laws that govern creation must be one. And in science, is it by coincidence? No. The greatest aim of science is to write an equation, one equation, unified theory through the unified theory, the unification theory. One equation that explains all the forces of nature. And they believe, scientists believe that it exists, and that's the way it must be. In Islam, we find it very interesting, and very beautiful, and very consistent with the Tawheed of Allah. concept of oneness, of affirming the oneness of God, the unification, therefore, of all the laws of nature through this concept. Like I mentioned earlier, that I am in dhikr, in prayer, unifies me with everything in the universe, because everything is in the universe is in form of prayerfulness or dhikr, as I am in ways I do not necessarily understand. In physics, you know, the wave matter duality, right? Every matter, like every electron, every proton, every quark, every particle is endowed with dual nature, namely what? Particle-like and wave-like. Particle-like and wave-like. Anybody studied the double slit experiment? Right? That's exactly what it is about. It's a beam of electron, and the electrons seem to have gone at the same time in both slits. One electron goes at the same time in both slits. And that's one of the ways that scientists have confirmed this concept of duality of matter. Material reality, material-like reality, and wave-like reality, which when you ponder from a religious point of view, for me as a Muslim, wow, that's very interesting. It's a sort of a plausible argument that the human being is not only material, it's something else. It's spiritual as well, something like a wave-like concept. Only wave, no matter. And it's very interesting also to observe. Dunya and Akhirah, this world and the world of the hereafter. We believe certainly, as Muslims and other religious people also do, not all, that there is this world and there is an afterworld, after this world, beyond this world. Well, it will be interesting, as many of you know, that when in science we speak nowadays in scientific terms, through mathematical equations about higher dimension, about hyperspace, right? But universes beyond this one that we conceive of, because the only universe we conceive of in space-time in 4 dimensions, that is 3 of space and 1 of time, is ours. We don't conceive of something beyond 4-dimensional universe. What's a 5-dimensional universe? What's a 10th-dimensional universe? They exist in science. And it takes a lot to venture into one. So far, we cannot. Because if we're to make a machine able to produce an energy to make a hole or a gate into space-time to go into another universe, scientists tell us that we need all the budgets of all the countries in the world, and we will not be able to build that machine. And it is interesting that there exists hyperspace, the world beyond. What is it exactly? What does it mean? I find it, as a Muslim, scientifically speaking, and I'm a religious person by also training. I came today wearing this just to make a point. Number one. And number two, that there is a very easy transition between this and that, of that and this. And there is no necessarily, again, this rupture between intellect and the spirit, or the spiritual. We show that in the way we live as well, and we should. So, what is hyperspace? What's the beyond? Here's a plausible argument for Akhirah, for the world of the beyond. In science, we know that there are worlds of the beyond. And thus, again, this convergence between science and religion, at least as I view it, learned it, practice it as a Muslim. The concept of a wormhole, or a gate into other universes from this universe, The Quran, God tells us in the Quran, وَلَوْ فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ بَابًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ فَظَلُّوا فِيهِ يَعْرُجُونَ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا سُكِّرَتْ أَبْصَارُنَا بَلْ نَحْنُ قَوْمٌ مَسْحُورُونَ. Which means if we were to open for them a gate, it just says that, Baba. If we were to open to them a gate into the heavens, i.e. into space-time, فَظَلُّوا فِيهِ يَعْرُجُونَ, and they remain therein traveling. I'm going to pause here for a moment. The word يَعْرُجُونَ, I translate it as journeying or traveling into this, beyond this gate that is open into space-time, into the heavens. The word is يَعْرُجُونَ. And يَعْرُجُونَ in the Arabic language actually means to move in curvature, in curved trajectory. Did you hear that? And this text teaches if you were to open a gate into space-time for them, and they would be يَعْرُجُونَ, journeying. That I use them into English in Arabic is يَعْرُجُونَ, and يَعْرُجُونَ actually is to travel in a curved trajectory. What does that remind you of? In physics, in relativity. Yes. Projectile motion, it's very good. That projectile motion is in this space, in 2 dimensions, and that we make it that way. But that's a curved motion, that's true. But something very interesting that I mentioned about opening a gate into the universe. Space-time, you learn in special relativity, those of you who did, is what? Curved. Curved. You can't imagine mathematics. It proves that. That's one of the greatest discoveries of Einstein. Space-time is curved. In other words, actually, any object traveling in space-time is traveling in a curved trajectory. By the fact that we are in 4 dimensions and there exist stars and planets and gravitational fields, space-time is bent, is curved. So like you put an object in a bent plane, what will happen to it? If you move along the bent plane, it will not move literally, but it will move in curved space. So Allah in the Quran says, if we were to open to the gate into the heavens, and they would be يَعْرُجُونَ. It described that journey as a curved, space-time, if you would. And this is miraculous, as far as we can tell, since this book was released 14 centuries ago. And the concept of angels, what are angels? Well, we can plausibly argue that angels are creatures living in hyperspace, right? In universes, in dimensions beyond ours. Ours is, as you know, 4 and so on. The miracle, if I give you a bottle, this closed bottle, an empty closed bottle, and I tell you remove the water without opening the bottle, without cutting it, without doing anything to it that will spoil it. Can you do that? It cannot, of course. It's impossible in our 3-dimensional universe with time 4. It's impossible. But scientists tell us that this is science, really. You can read something like this in one of the great works of great scientists. It simplifies a lot of science. Professor Michio Kaku of New York University, very famous physicist also. And his book is Hyperspace. And in that book, you know how you can do that? You take this bottle to a 4th dimension. How do you do that? That's a different issue. You take it to a 4th dimension or to a 5th dimension, and there you have more freedom of action. Because the higher dimensions, the more freedom of movement, For example, this is a plane. How many degrees of freedom do you have of motion in this plane? No, not 3, 6. 6, my God. 2. This is a plane, 2. X and Y. That's a plane. You have only 2 degrees of freedom. Then if you go to a sphere, then how many degrees of freedom do you have? 3, because you added height. By adding height, you have more degrees of freedom. And you can do in 3 dimensions that which you cannot do in 2 dimensions. Right? Imagine this. This is not my own invention. Reiterated in my own words. Imagine you're in a prison in 2 dimensions. And this 2-dimensional creature is in prison. What's a prison in a 2-dimensional system? What is it? 2-dimensional creature doesn't have height. Just flat brain, flat body, flat everything, flat heart. So how do you jail them?
In a square plane.
That's right. Just draw a square. Or draw a circle. A closed line, closed curve. And then they're jailed. They can't get out. Suddenly, you come from 3 dimensions. And you do this. You go above the jail. And 3 dimensions do not exist in the 2-dimensional world. It's impossible. And then you do what? Suddenly you land your finger there, and the 3 and the 2-dimensional guard will see something from nowhere suddenly materializing. Was he going to see 2-dimensional cross section of your finger only, and then fix the prisoner disappears suddenly, because now it's put into 3rd dimension. Of course, the guard will go berserk, will go nuts, crazy. They're going to take him to a flat hospital, 2-dimensional hospital, flat doctors. In other words, my point is that when you go to a higher degree of dimensions, you have greater degrees of freedom of motion. And thus, the concept of miracles becomes something also scientifically plausible. It's a miracle because in the laws of physics as we know them, it's impossible. Laws of physics as we know them, it's impossible. And thus, again, the convergence between religion and science. Time dilation and time contraction. You know, at least it seems to be, not maybe everybody, but many of you would know, that if an object is traveling at a speed that is very close to the speed of light, it's very difficult. It's not but small, very small particles. Photons travel at the speed of light, maybe neutrinos travel at a greater speed of light. We don't know. There have been some scientific recent things and experiments that might come to the conclusion, as they have claimed, that neutrinos travel at the speed greater than the speed of light. So when you travel at that speed of close to the speed of light, what happens to time? Like it stands still. You don't age. Or if you are in a field of very strong gravitational pull, like a black hole, neutron star, what will happen? Again, time almost like stop still. If a person, assuming in this Duncan experiment, in this thought experiment, a person would be traveling at that speed or in that field of gravitational pull, then he or she would see all his life or her life, all of it pass, and all the events pass like in a blink of an eye. It's amazing, isn't it? Why am I mentioning this? Again, from the religious point of view, Islamic point of view, is that when we die, or when we are about to die at the moment of no return, something like that happens, we're told. The scroll of all your life passes in front of you, and you see yourself and your deeds and your words in front of you. 60 years, 100 years, 70 years, 90 years, the scroll, you read it, and it's amazing. The Quran teaches us that certain things happen as they ascend to God, to the divine, in a day, the length of which is 1,000 years of what you count. To me, that's a very interesting concept because it reminds me of the relativity of time. In other words, 1,000 years on Earth would equal, in some other frame of reference, only one day on Earth. Is that possible? Yes, of course. Physics, relativity is really possible. As a matter of fact, have you heard that a few years ago, Muslim scientists discovered through very simple equations, which I reviewed in a lecture about this years ago, he computed in a very elegant, simple way, found another way to compute the speed of light on this basis. On the basis that 1,000 years on Earth, and the day he picked that gave the right results is the sidereal day, sidereal day, and sidereal month. The month has almost 28 days, that's sidereal month. And the day, the length of which is 1,000 years of what you count. So what is this distance traveled, which is equal to 1,000 years of traveling on Earth or in our planetary system, and the reference taken was the moon, because when Quran was revealed, it spoke to people whose calendar was the lunar calendar, and therefore the distance that an object like the moon will travel in 1,000 years at the speed that the moon does around the sun. Now, what speed would it be required to travel 1,000 years to be equal to 1 day here on Earth? And we found that speed to be exactly, extremely accurate relative to the latest computational science to be the speed of light. And thus, the speed of light becomes another definition, namely that the speed that is required to cross a distance of 1,000 years that would be traveled on Earth in 1 day at the speed of the moon's revolution around the sun. In other words, this person and other persons were inspired by, as religious people, as scientists, were inspired by something in the Quran. Again, bringing together this convergence between religion and science. Anybody knows what quantum physics is? Anybody has heard the word quantum fluctuation? No? Okay. Scientists like Stephen Hawking, anybody heard Stephen Hawking? Had postulated, argued that matter can be formed from nothing. Matter can be formed from nothing. It just takes a quantum fluctuation. The quantum fluctuation, I think, in my opinion, is a very fancy word to say really we don't know how it happened. It was not, and suddenly it is. Because previously, by the concept of conservation and mass and energy, it's impossible that something can come from nothing. So some scientists had laughed at him in his paper, but then he has become some of the greatest minds in science of all history. And that in the presence of the horizon of a black hole, close to that point, a particle of matter and antimatter. Matter and antimatter. What's antimatter? It's a fancy word. Matter and antimatter. In matter, they put together. In antimatter, they put apart. For example, matter and antimatter, when they come together, they annihilate. Matter and antimatter together, the same mass and so on, equals zero. But they can coexist for a small amount of time. So at the event, at the periphery of a black hole, if matter and antimatter are such that, for example, the antiparticle is inside and the matter particle is outside. The one that's inside is pulled by the black hole, and there's radiation, black hole radiation of some kind, and then the other one is released free. So here is matter produced from nothing. Now, the quantum fluctuation to me as a Muslim is when God says kun, fayakun. God says be, and it is. One way to look at that at the current state of our knowledge is a quantum fluctuation. Because science does not deal, so far as it is defined, science does not deal with why things are the way they are, but what are things are and how they might have come back. What's the cause? What's the observable cause? I should underline. What's the observable cause? But as to why and unobservable causes and prime causes, it seems that's not the realm of science as we have defined it. You know, the concept of singularities, singularity of black hole, singularity is a point at which all the laws of physics are broken, even before that. For example, at a singularity, this universe, before it came into being, as we know it, scientists tell us it was what? Singularity. Singularity is a point so minuscule, which carried all the matter, M-A-T-T-E-R, matter, all the matter and energy that exists now in the universe, in an infinitesimally small point. Imagine, like 10 to the minus 45, it's not still a singularity. 10 to the minus 45 of a centimeter, like 1 divided by 1 next to the 45 zeros of a centimeter. This is a centimeter. And in that space, all matter and energy resided. In other words, a density like close to infinite. And where was that point, that singularity? It was in space, right? Test. What PI students? Black hole? I'm going to talk about you to scientists. Yeah, there was no space. We're talking about singularities. There was no space. Can you imagine that? No, you can't. There was no space. It was a point, not in space. And before that, see the word before is just English. It's human. It's four-dimensional terminology. Before time equal to 0. Before time t equals 0. You hear me? Before time t equals 0. I said before, and before is time. But there is no time before time equals 0. Imagine that. Science tells us that there was such a thing. And right after that, there was a singularity. All matter of the universe and everything was packed into this infinitesimal point. The laws of physics as we know them, to the extent that in order to continue more physics, they, like Steve Hawking, had to postulate some other time called imaginary time. Like imaginary number, complex numbers, A plus JB. JB is the imaginary part. Time and imaginary time, it has to be postulated to continue the physics and to go beyond our experiences. I find that very, very interesting to continue beyond the break point of the laws of science as we know it. And Steve Hawking says, if the laws of science broke down at the beginning of the universe, they would break down anywhere. End of quote. They would break down. I just want by this to tickle your minds and your spirits to the concept also of the beyond, to the extent that new physics and mathematics are required to find new mathematics, new postulations to deal with that which is beyond, for instance. The Muslim early sociologist who wrote in what we might call in modern terminology days in rational and scientific terms about sociology and natural history, Ibn Khaldun, the 14th century, he spoke of the continuum of matter, food, and spirit, and he spoke of evolution. It's incredible. But he spoke about it in the context of prophethood. I'm going to read, from a translation of this great medieval work by Professor Rosenthal, translated the work of Khaldun al-Muqaddimah, the introduction. Is alone. This world, with all the created things in it, has a certain order and solid construction. It shows nexuses between causes and things caused, combinations of some parts of creation with others, combinations of some part of creations with others, and transformations of some existent things into others, in a pattern that is both remarkable and endless, beginning with the world of the body and sensual perception, and therein first with the world of the visible elements. One notices how these elements are arranged gradually and continually in an ascending order, from earth to water to air and to fire. Each one of the elements is prepared to be transformed into the next higher or lower one, and sometimes is transformed. The higher one is always finer than the one preceding it. Eventually, the world of the spheres is reached. They are finer than anything else. They are in layers which are interconnected in a shape which the senses are able to perceive only through the existence of motions. These motions provide some people with knowledge of the measurements and positions of the spheres, and also with knowledge, of the existence of the essences beyond, influence of which is noticeable in the spheres through the fact that they have motion. Spheres mean not this sphere is a sphere, but the path of a planet around the orbit of a star. Their orbits, basically, they mean by that the orbits. He says, one should then look at the world of creation. It started out from the minerals and progressed in an ingenious, gradual manner to plants and animals. The last stage of minerals is connected with the first stage of plants, such as herbs and seedless plants. The last stage of plants, such as palms and vines, is connected with the first stage of animals, such as snails and shellfish, which have only the power of touch. The word connection, with regard to these created things, means that the last stage of each group is fully prepared to become the first stage of the next group. The animal world then widens, its species become numerous, and in a gradual process of creation, it finally leads to man, who is able to think and to reflect. The highest stage of man is reached from the world of the monkeys, in which both sagacity and perception are found, but which has not reached the stage of actual reflection and thinking. At this point, we come to the first stage of man. This is as far as our physical observation extends. And he goes on talking about this and connecting it to the spiritual realm. In the world of creation, there are certain influences of the notions of growth and perception, etc. Until he comes to say, this spiritual thing is the soul, which has perception and causes motion, and so on and so forth. My point by this is this man of science was actually hailed by many Western scholars and great students of the history of science as the first who has truly written history in a way that is reflective and critical, and not only cites chronologically what happened in history, but draws the lessons sociologically, politically, psychologically, and so on and so forth. And wrote also in natural history. My point by that is that look how these two realms are talked about in an integral way, in a natural way, and in an easy way for us to appreciate without having to disconnect the spiritual from the material, but look at all of those as a continuum, as we look at the oneness of God, the affirmation of the oneness of God, we look at the affirmation of the oneness of the laws that govern this creation. Many of you should know that in the Quran, in the book of Divine Revelation, Muslim scholars, religious scholars, and scientists currently nowadays find inspiration not only at the spiritual level, at the moral level, at the ethical level, and so on, but also some at the scientific level. And to read in that things that, as far as we are concerned, become therefore sorts of miracles, of signs of the veracity of the word of God in the Quran. For example, God teaches in the Quran, أَوَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا كَيْفَ يُبْدِئُ اللَّهُ الْخَلْقَ ثُمَّ يُعِيدُهُ. This is in chapter 29, verse 19, or chapter 10, verse 4 as well. Haven't they observed how God begins creation and how thereafter he returns it? Well, how do we know how creation began? From earth. By doing what? Come on. You should know that.
Research.
What? What type of research? Exactly, research. What type of research? That exists already that we know? Pardon? Archaeology is one.
History.
Archaeology does not take us too far.
History.
history, truth does not take us too far. Creation was began, the process of creation itself. Geology, we're getting there.
Seasons,
Pardon?
astronomy,
Yeah, how?
there the same thing happening, or something similar or possible.
The first time was right. Yes, astronomy. How is that? Astronomy, about astronomy, what we observe into space-time. And it just happens that we know now, the further you look, you're looking into
The best.
the past. When we look at a star now, when we look at a star, and that star is, let's say it's 100 light years away. 100 light years away. And you're looking at a star that is 100 light years away. You know what 100 light years away, right? That's the distance light traveled at the speed of light during 100,000 years. Right? 100 light years away during 100 years. So when you're looking at a star that is 100 light years, and light traveled at the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second, what are you looking at actually?
100 years ago.
Exactly. You're looking at that star the way it used to be 100 years ago. In other words, assume the star dies now. Then what happens?
It's a bit 100 years.
You will be looking at it for the next 100 years. And yet it is not there, but you're looking at it. Because you're looking at the past. And come on, what about a galaxy that is 10 billion light years away? Again, we're looking at the galaxy the way it used to be, around the early beginnings of creation. It's very interesting to read that verses like that. Here, search on earth, walk, and see how the world, the universe creation was begun. And then it will be returned to its original state. It will be returned to its original state. It's very interesting because scientists are doing now what about what's the end of the universe. It's going to end either in a big crunch from the Big Bang, or it shall continue expansion forever. Is it true or false? I heard that, read that, right? The answer to that depends on something else, scientists say. Something called dark matter. Dark matter. What is dark matter? When scientists, in scientific ways, weigh the universe, they didn't put it on the scale. They weighed the universe through mathematical equations, through observations, and so on. They found out that the weight of the universe or galaxy is actually only 1 to 10% when observed to the real weight of the universe or of a galaxy. In other words, 90% of that matter, they cannot know what it is. That's they call dark matter. And only speculation so far as to what it is. Only then, if we have the answer to that question, then they would know whether the universe most likely will come back to a big crunch, or it continues forever expanding. From this verse, Muslims would tend to believe which alternative, if you know these meanings in science, the first alternative, to big crunch. And that's so far what most of the scientists are speculating, but there is no definitive evidence for that. The Quran teaches interestingly also. In chapter 51, verse 47, God speaks of the heavens, space-time, and says, and we are expanding them. Exact wording, and we are expanding them. Every basic student of physics knows that in physics we are learning as a fact the concept of what? of expansion in the universe. From the Big Bang, when the universe was all in that singularity, and suddenly an explosion of matter and energy of space and time, not an explosion into space or into time. Remember we said earlier, at that point there was no space and there was no time. So it's an explosion into space, an explosion of space and of time. And then from then on, there's the expansion. By the way, the expansion where? You're smiling because that's the right reaction. Because remember, beyond is undefined. There's no space. There's no time. It's amazing. That's what science says. It's not religious words. This is what science says. Beyond, it's not an expansion into space or into time. I'm sorry, into space or into time, but it's an explosion of space and of time. What are the boundaries of this universe as it expands? The question doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense because we don't know the answers. The Quran teaches the universe is expanding, and that actually it started at a breakup point. أولم يرى الذين كفروا أن السماوات والأرض كانتا رتقا ففتقناهما. You can read that in chapter 21, verse 30, when God teaches us space-time, matter, uses earth, all of it was one thing. Ratqa, strongly held together. And then we cause them to break asunder. This is a breakage that is violent, powerful. And that's what we call, we believe, in current modern science, what? The Big Bang. That's all. We can go on and on with this to elucidate in addition to what we said, but in Islam, the concept of science, in Islam, we find a very easy way of reconciliation. I should even call it reconciliation. I think both science and religion in Islam are two sides of the same coin. And thus, I find myself, both as a scientist and as a person of religion, very easy and very comfortable in my life. As I read science, or I study science, or as I read religion, study religion, and I practice religion spiritually, I find myself more and more in unison with nature and the laws of nature, because everything with me is celebrating and glorifying the name of God. When we go to the level of embryology, we find strange, very, very interesting thing also in the Quran. Since time does not permit me to say a lot more, I'm going to, in that regard, for example, just read to you a quote from a book on embryology that was used for first-year UCLA students, University of California, Los Angeles. Some of you might have had the chance to read some of those excerpts. And the author, Professor Moore, says, it is cited in the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, that human beings are produced from a mixture of secretions from the male and the female. Several references are made to the creation of the human being from a sperm drop, and it is also suggested that the resulting organisms settle in the woman like a seed. This is in Sunnah, this next one, not in the Quran, 6 days after its beginning. The human blastocyst begins to implant about 6 days after fertilization. The Quran also states that the sperm drop develops into a clot of congealed blood. An implanted blastocyst or a spontaneously aborted conceptus who resembled a blood clot. Reference is also made to the leech-like appearance of the embryo, and so on. All of this from the Quran are facts, become facts, are facts in embryology, which Professor Noor, in his book, that is from which these paragraphs are quoted, is the book which was at the year of this article, current embryology textbook for the first year class at UCLA Medical School. And in the light of 14 centuries ago, that would have been impossible for man to know those details. The concept of, again, what is the origin of the human being? In Islam, the Quran teaches us in many verses. One of the verses teaches, and we need to take all of those verses together, have a compound idea of what the Quran teaches us on the origin of man. In that verse, it teaches, as some of you know as Muslims, that God created the human being from clay or mud, stinking mud. And for developmental stages, he became. Because God says that we created you in stages. And those stages are true embryologically, we know that. Before this, or during the revelation of the Quran, the common view in the world and amongst philosophers, scientists of those days, until basically the 18th century, the Aristotle's notion of how a child came to existence, as some of you should know, is that the human being is fully formed as a minuscule human in the semen of the maid. Did you know that? Yeah. In the semen of the maid, and that the presence of the semen in the mother's womb simply fertilizes that and feeds it, and it keeps growing. Or the other view was that actually the human being comes fully formed from the blood of the menstruation of the woman, and that the semen of the maid simply is a catalyst and fertilizer, and helps it grow. This is the view up to the 18th century. The Quran spoke of the embryological stages as we know them now in our times. And that's something very fascinating, very interesting. Again, showing what I started early in the beginning, this integration, this continuum between rational and supra-rational, between the matter and the spirit, between religion and science. And therefore you find, and I'm going to quickly close with this. If you want, I can go on 2 hours, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to be as brief as I can. And therefore you have found Muslim scientists who are profoundly religious also, as I mentioned, and who have made great contributions to the history of science. Muslims, after the coming of Islam, after the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, may God's peace be with him and all the messengers, and he taught human beings the word of God that contained some of the things I mentioned to you. The world changed, and the Arabs changed, and the world changed. And Muslims also took from the existing legacy of human civilizations before. They translated the great works of medieval times, talking about the 8th century, 7th, 8th century, 9th century, 8th, 9th, 10th century, 8th century books. They had translated the great works of previous civilizations, the Greeks, the Persians, the Hindus, and then enriched humanity through this powerful drive in Islam of the integration between the rational and the supra-rational, between the material and the spiritual, and therefore produced great strides of science and it is upon the shoulders of those Muslim medieval scientists that the Western modern civilization was built, as many current modern historians have also told us. So, coupled with all this exposure to Greek and Hindu and Persian knowledge, and the principles that I mentioned to you from Islamic teachings, that gave rise to a galaxy of Muslim luminaries in the fields of all scientific disciplines known to man at that time. Their works circulated in Europe and were translated into Latin and other European languages. For example, Ibn Nafis, centuries before William Harvey, described the blood circulation. Ibn al-Haytham al-Azan is known in the West of the 10th century, also centuries before Newton, described the refraction of light and believed in the principle of least time. Those of you who studied some classical optics. Al-Khazini, centuries before Torricelli, knew the density of air, and before Newton had already talked about the law of gravity. Al-Battani and Al-Farghani of the 10th century, and Al-Fazani and Al-Biruni and Al-Sijzi before Copernicus and Galileo entertained the scientific debate about the nature of our planetary system, whether geocentric or heliocentric. By the way, is it geocentric or heliocentric? Heliocentric. Good. Let's know the difference. Earth is not anymore the center of the universe. To the extent, listen to this, that Sijzi believed that our planetary system is heliocentric. And that's the view he favored, and he even built an astrolabe based on this view in the 10th century. Ibn al-Haytham and al-Biruni, when it came to the scientific method of research, were the ones upon whose shoulders Roger Bacon stood, as some have put it. Al-Khwarizmi, whose name brought to us the term, which term? Algorithm. Word algorithm, I've used it. That's an Arabic word, which is actually simply a mutilated way to say Al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizm, Al-Gawarizm, Al-Gawarizm. It became algorithm, and it became algorithm. Al-Khwarizmi, whose name brought to us the term algorithm, and whose genius created algebra, the name or the word he used for his treatise in Arabic called Al-Jabr. Al-Jabr wal-Muqabala. He's the first one who invented algebra and how to solve algebraic equations of one variable, two variables, and so on. And the way his method of putting the variables aside and the constants aside, that's called Al-Jabr wal-Muqabala. Al-Jabr became algebra. Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Averroes, and Ibn Rushd were the most celebrated physicians in the West. Their works, not only in medicine, but in philosophy and rationalistic thinking, had great influence in Europe. And as I mentioned, Ibn Khaldun of the 14th century gained his fame for his works in sociology and natural history. And thus we see this conflict between religion and science in Islam, and some of which, unfortunately, or most of which, unfortunately, is unknown to most. Only very special students of knowledge of the science of history know these things. Even Muslims sometimes, in their own countries, in their own environments, are unaware of these facts. science, and thus unaware of the symbiosis that exists Islamically between science and religion, between true science and true religion, not scientific dogmatism, nor religious dogmatism. Sometimes, or rather, we should always require from science to give us the scientific facts, not to dogmatize science works. Religiously, you can ask religious people also to tell us the facts of religion, rather than to dogmatize for us religion. In that way, I think we all better off, and in that way, I think that greater appreciation generally of the religion of Islam is reached, and that bridges between the world of the rational and the world of science, I think, and the world of science, yes, is most beautifully attained through realizing what Islam historically had of relationship with the rational and with the scientific, and the contribution of Muslim scientists to human civilization, and thereby, I think, many of the fears, many of the misconceptions that we have about Islam as Muslims and as non-Muslims would, I think, disappear, and would help us build cleaner bridges and stronger bridges towards a brighter future. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
And before we conclude, I'm going to open the door for any questions.
With your last point, could you just briefly contrast between facts and dogmatism? For those of us who aren't here for this. Yeah.
I mean by that, between, for example, scientific facts and some personal, philosophical, or cultural interpretations of those facts. For example, let's take an example of medieval times. Even when the notion was wrong that the Earth was the center of the universe, and it was quote unquote scientifically held so, it didn't have to be dogmatized. And how was it dogmatized? You know? Religiously.
Religiously, it had to do with certain interpretations of scriptures.
For example, or not even that, but rather that the Earth being the center of the universe is a good thing to have religiously. Why? Because that would explain, not rationally, but simply emotionally, that we are at the center of concern of the divine. We are the center of the universe, so we are really under the gaze of the divine, and God is looking at us. But if we are just one of the specks of dust in the universe, we're not the center of the universe, to them, that's dogmatism. And we're not anymore at the center of attention of the divine. It doesn't have to be that way. That the center of the universe being Earth, therefore we are at the center of attention of the divine, and if we're not anymore. But that's dogmatism. Another example. You know, the fact that when it comes to the origin of life, what's the origin of life? And then we go back to the point, then the DNA, where did it come from? This ordered pattern of information, this extreme order, this extreme intelligence there, where did it come from? But dogmatizing science is interpreting it by saying, you see, well, it came spontaneously. We don't have to introduce the agency of God to explain the origin of these things. God does not exist, or some say we don't have to introduce the agency of God in explaining the origin of life, because the origin of life is because of this spontaneous coming together of organic matter, maybe even of protein from certain conditions that prevailed at that time. Despite the fact that it violates the second law of thermodynamics. Are you following me? Despite the fact that it violates the second law of thermodynamics, because the second law of thermodynamics teaches that you cannot have order in a closed system from disorder, never, until you introduce an external force to the system to order the disorder, to make order in the disorder. So to say that in this open universe of ours, which is closed after all, beyond the universe there is nothing, quote unquote, that this disorder, lifelessness, no life existed as disorder, we're not ordered in a living way, suddenly comes spontaneously because of the passage of time. That's a violation of second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy. And thus to say, they forget this violation of the second law of thermodynamics, and then says it came spontaneously. We do not have to postulate an external agency, divine, that produced that order. And I think that's dogmatism. Science only should tell us, these are the facts. This is what happened. Don't go beyond that. Also religion, as I gave the other example, tell us the facts. Don't make your interpretations as reality. It might be true, might be false. Don't dogmatize and present dogmatism as fact. Present the facts as facts, dogmatism as dogmatism. Or interpretations as interpretations. Don't give me an interpretation and give it the garb of science. Right? Don't give me a personal spiritual experience and give it the garb of the divine. Same thing. That's religious dogmatism. Are you with me? Don't give me a personal religious experience, spiritual religious experience, and give it the garb of, I was inspired by God. God spoke to me. Example. Tell me what you experienced, your interpretation, but don't make it a religious fact on the other side. Give me scientific facts and don't mix them with your interpretations until your interpretations become facts to me or to the uninitiated. That's what I meant. Does it help? No. So, thank you. Yes. So, yes, I did mention that earlier. Big Bang Theory and the verse I quoted to you and I gave you the verse number in the Quran in Surah Al-Anbiya that God spoke of that concept. They observed that heavens and earth were ratqan, clothed together. Fataqa in the Arabic language means to break violently, strongly. And broke them asunder. That's what we believe would probably allude to the concept of the scientific fact of the Big Bang. The scientific fact of the Big Bang, but where the details of the Big Bang keep on. Sometimes some of the details are modified. Right? When they add the concept of inflation of the Big Bang theory. Not that the Big Bang is not true, but it was not complete. The Big Bang existed, but something else that happened in the early stages of the Big Bang called inflation that must be added to that concept to have a better and more accurate theory of that Big Bang explosion. And then I connected that to the text that teaches in the Quran that the universe is expanding. Actually, at the time you're reading the Quran, at the time the Quran was revealed, at the time you're reading it, because the grammatical usage in that verse is a progressive form. وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ, and we are surely expanding. It means 14 centuries, and now as you are reading it, it is taking place, which I find fascinating. The usage of language is very, very important. The understanding of it is very important to understand, I think, some of the nuances and specifics that are mentioned in the Quran. Any other question? I think you're hungry. That's why you don't want to ask any question. That's matter. Now let's go to the material, enough of the intellectual and spiritual, and let's integrate with the material so that we practically show how Islam integrates food of the body and food of the spirit. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
Before I end, I want to give a special thanks to our respected guest speaker for all his work and great participation in our event. I also want to thank our volunteers for all the help they provided, for considering our events part of their classes to help us always look good, neat, and professional. Last but not least, special thanks to our chaplain, Imam Ja'far Sabkhawi, who couldn't make it tonight, and to our MSA e-board members for the great work and assistance to make this event happen. However, we have a very, very special thanks for everyone here who showed up tonight and made this event happen, and made this event very special and successful. We invite you to our traditional Eastern dinner that will be served in a moment. After that, we will have the draw and announce the raffle of giveaway winner of the tablet. Thank you.